The smell of Millhaven General Hospital at 2 in the morning was a specific, layered thing. It started with bleach, the industrial kind that scorched the back of the throat and left a chemical ghost on the tongue for hours afterward. Beneath that was the antiseptic sting of chlorhexidine, the same sharp citrus alcohol scent that had lived in Elena Vasquez's skin for 3 years, embedded so deeply into her pores that she no longer noticed it unless someone new walked close and flinched. Beneath both of those, if you stood still long enough and breathed slowly enough, was the human layer, the warm, close smell of sick bodies of coffee gone cold in paper cups, of the faint, sweet chemical decay that gathered in the corners of rooms where people were quietly losing their battles. Elena noticed all three every single night she walked through the sliding glass doors of the psychiatric wing. She catalogued them the way she catalogued everything, automatically, without conscious effort, the way a person catalogues the sound of their own heartbeat. You didn't think about it, you just knew it was there. And you knew the moment something changed. She was 38 years old, and she had been a psychiatric nurse at Millhaven General for 29 months. Before that, she had been Elena Vasquez, NOS officer, clandestine service, Central Intelligence Agency, Station Chief Oman. Before that, Baghdad. Before that, a rotating series of temporary postings that existed in classified filing systems under code designations and never appeared on any resume she was allowed to show a civilian employer. And before all of that, a small airless office in Langley, Virginia, where a woman with reading glasses and a coffee-stained personnel file had told her in the flattest possible voice that she had the highest psychological aptitude scores in her incoming class, and asked if she had any interest in field work. She had said yes. That yes had cost her 9 years, 4 cover identities, 2 blown operations, one of which she still dreamed about in specific, accurate detail, 3 or 4 nights a week. 11 kills confirmed, 3 unconfirmed, in circumstances she was not permitted to discuss and had no interest in discussing. A scar on her left collarbone from a knife that had belonged to a man she had been sent to recruit and who had decided to try to kill her instead. A marriage that had lasted 14 months before her husband. A good, ordinary man who taught chemistry and coached the junior varsity swim team, told her he could not be married to someone who was, fundamentally, not there. He had not been wrong. And finally, at the end of all of it, an early retirement that the official paperwork described as voluntary separation due to psychological fatigue. The paperwork was not entirely inaccurate. She was tired, the specific ground-level bone tiredness of someone who had spent nearly a decade operating on the permanent, humming frequency of mortal risk. But she was not unstable. She was not broken. She was a woman who had looked at what her life had become, the compartmentalization, the calculated manipulation of human beings for strategic advantage, the way she had learned to look at every person she met and immediately, involuntarily, assess them as either an asset, a liability, or a threat, and had decided with clear eyes that she wanted to do something that moved in precisely the opposite direction, something that kept people alive instead of the alternative, psychiatric nursing. She had chosen it deliberately. She had earned the credential and applied for the overnight position at Millhaven General because it was a quiet ward in a mid-sized city and because the overnight shift on a psychiatric unit was work that most people didn't want, which meant nobody paid very close attention to the person doing it. She wanted to disappear into the useful, honest labor of it. She wanted to be seen only as far as necessary to do her job well. No further. She pushed the medication cart through the corridor of Ward 7 with the practiced quiet of someone who had once moved through the halls of a Jordanian safe house, carrying a suppressed Walther and a set of forged EU passports. The cart's left front wheel had a slight wobble that produced a faint rhythmic squeak against the polished linoleum. She had reported it to maintenance 3 times. Maintenance had not fixed it. She had stopped reporting it and had begun to use the squeak as an internal metronome, pacing herself through the long corridor of the night shift. Squeak. Pause. Room 7-1. Mr. Alderman, 72, late-stage vascular dementia, currently in his 3rd straight night of sundowning, convinced the nurses were Soviet agents who had replaced his real nurses through something he called the substitution protocol. She gave him his Seroquel with warm decaf. The decaf mattered. Actual caffeine sent him into a spiral that lasted until 5 a.m. and listened to him explain the fluoride conspiracy for 4.5 minutes, her face open and unhurried, before redirecting him gently towards sleep. Room 703, Miss Trujillo, 41. Acute bipolar episode. First hospitalization. Awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring at the ceiling with the wide, straight raw eyes of a woman who didn't yet understand what was happening inside her own brain. Elena sat in the plastic visitor's chair for 6 minutes. She did not offer platitudes. She said, "The medication will start working in about 72 hours. I'm going to check on you every 2 hours until it does. You're not alone in here." Ms. Trujillo cried. Elena handed her a tissue and waited. She had learned, in a very different context, that silence was not a vacuum to be filled. It was a container. What people put into it when they trusted the container was almost always more important than what they would have said if you'd spoken first. Room 708. This was where she paused. The chart read, Holloway, Preston R. Admitting diagnosis, acute stress response with dissociative features. Referral source, Cedar Pines Executive Wellness Center. Preston Holloway was 54 years old. Retired Army colonel, 3 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan before transitioning into private security consulting. According to the Cedar Pines clinician's notes, resistant to therapeutic intervention and aggressively dismissive of civilian medical authority. Elena had read that as shorthand for a man who had spent 30 years being the authority in the room and had no functional schema for being the patient. She understood that particular cognitive architecture. She pulled the cart to a stop, checked the medication tray, prazosin for the nightmares, sertraline they were titrating up slowly, and pushed the door open. The room was lit by the pale blue glow of the window. The city outside was quiet at this hour. Preston Holloway was sitting upright in his own clothes, dark trousers, grey shirt, heavy watch, which he had refused to exchange for a hospital gown for the 2nd consecutive night, arms folded, jaw set. He looked at Elena the way he looked at everything in Ward 7, with a flat, measuring contempt that he didn't bother to conceal. "You again," he said. "Me again." Elena agreed pleasantly. She set the medication cup on the bedside tray and pulled the rolling stool closer without asking permission. She had learned in the first 2 nights that asking permission with Holloway was tactically counterproductive. It invited him to say no, and then they were in a negotiation that wasted time. Simply sitting down treated the conversation as already underway. "How are the nightmares?" "I don't have nightmares." "The prazosin is specifically for nightmares," Elena said. "It reduces the adrenergic activity that drives REM cycle intrusions in people with trauma-related sleep disruption." "I know what it does. I have a master's degree." He looked at the cup. "I didn't authorize that dosage." "Doctor, I didn't authorize that dosage. Reyes authorized it during morning rounds. You were present. You said, and I'm quoting, 'Fine, whatever.' That wasn't authorization. That was dismissal. In clinical practice, they produce the same outcome." She held his gaze. "You're sleeping approximately 2 hours a night. The room check logs confirm it. The room check logs confirm that I'm awake when someone opens my door every hour. Correlation is not causation." "Fair," Elena said. "Are you telling me you're sleeping well?" Silence. The muscle in his jaw worked once. She studied him while he decided whether to answer. The lines around his eyes were deep and specific, not from age or weather, but from the particular expression of a man who had been looking at things that weren't in the room. She recognized the map of it. She had seen it on colleagues in Baghdad and Amman and Beirut. The specific, exhausted topography of a face that had been on the wrong side of too many consequential decisions and couldn't stop replaying them. She recognized it because she saw something close to it in her own bathroom mirror every morning. "The prazosin won't fix what's keeping you awake," she said. her voice dropping from its clinical register into something quieter. The nightmares are a symptom, not the problem. But if you're not sleeping, you can't do the actual work. So the medication is useful even though it's not sufficient. Take it. He looked at the cup for a long moment. He picked it up. He swallowed the pills dry with the efficient economy of a man who had been swallowing field medication in difficult conditions for 30 years and found a cup of water, a bureaucratic nicety. Elena marked it on the chart and stood to leave. Nurse. His voice stopped her at the door. It had lost some of its edge. She turned. I'm not crazy, he said. The words came out raw, with the involuntary quality of something that had escaped rather than been released. Underneath the granite was something that was simply afraid, a man whose entire identity was built on being capable and in control, sitting in a psychiatric ward at 2:30 in the morning, saying something that cost him something to say. Elena looked at him without pity, and without the reflexive professional sympathy he would have seen through and resented. I know, she said quietly. Good night, Colonel. The collision that defined everything happened on a Tuesday at 6:45 in the morning, in the 15-minute overlap between the end of the night shift and the start of the day shift. Elena was at the nurse's station finishing her final documentation when the elevator doors opened and Preston Holloway stepped out. He was wearing his jacket and carrying his overnight bag, the posture of a man who had made a decision and was in the process of executing it. Behind him, nearly jogging, was Daria, the ward clerk, 23 years old, very good at her job and experiencing her first real encounter with a man who had spent his career making people stop trying to manage him. Sir, you need to speak with Dr. Reyes before any discharge can be processed, Daria was saying. There are AMA forms, there are follow-up referrals. I know what AMA stands for, Holloway said without looking at her. Bring me the form. Elena stood up. Colonel Holloway. The corridor voice, not loud, not aggressive, weighted in the way that a voice becomes weighted when the person behind it has spent years in rooms where the wrong word costs something. It hit a register that his body apparently still recognized even when his mind was working to override it. He stopped. He turned. You can't detain me, he said. I can't physically prevent you from leaving, Elena agreed. You're a voluntary admission with full legal capacity and the absolute right to make this decision. I'm also going to tell you that the prazosin hasn't reached therapeutic blood levels yet, and tonight will be worse than last night if you leave now. 10 minutes. Sit with me. Then you can go. He lasted 47 minutes. They sat on the bench outside room 701 and Elena asked a question that was not in any clinical intake form. She asked him what was actually happening with his company. Not the version he'd given Dr. Reyes, not the version in the Cedar Pines referral notes. The one he was awake at 2 a.m., unable to close his eyes about. What came out haltingly and then with increasing exhaustion was the outline of a man who had built a company placing former military personnel into private security contracts in unstable regions, in the gray zones of corporate security work, where the rules of engagement were murky and accountability was minimal. 18 months ago, he had signed off on placing a team in a region his own risk assessment had flagged as elevated. The contract was significant. The assessment had been overridden at the executive level. He had been part of that override. 3 months later, a 26-year-old former Marine named Carter had been killed in circumstances classified by the client and never to be publicly known. Carter had a wife. He had a daughter who was 4. He had a habit, mentioned in a profile note that Holloway had apparently not been able to unread, of sending his wife wildflowers from whatever country he was posted in. There were no more wildflowers. Elena listened. She did not offer absolution or the clinical refrain that Dr. Reyes would have offered. She asked specific, quiet questions and received the answers with the complete, undivided attention of someone who understood in a way that required no explanation what it meant to carry the weight of a decision that had cost someone their life. At the end of it, Holloway was quiet. You're not what I expected, he said. Come back inside, Elena said. 3 more days. Give the medication time. then we'll discuss discharge." He followed her back onto the ward. It was the following Thursday that Holloway, on his 5th day of hospitalization, became the instrument of the most serious professional crisis of Elena Vasquez's career at Millhaven General. At 10:40 in the morning, an admission came through that was flagged in a way that admissions to Ward 7 never were. It had bypassed the standard intake pipeline entirely, routed directly from the hospital administrator's office, with a notation specifying a private room, no admission photograph, no public registration in the hospital directory. The patient name was listed as V. Hargrove, no first name spelled out, no employer, no insurance carrier beyond a self-pay notation. The emergency contact was a single phone number with a 202 area code. Washington, D.C. She had built cover identities. She could recognize the deliberate blankness of a carefully managed paper trail, the way a musician recognizes a key change, not through conscious analysis, but through pattern recognition that lived below the level of articulated thought. V. Hargrove was a man in his mid-60s, silver-haired, trim, moving with the economical precision of someone who had spent decades being physically careful. His effect was managed, not flat, which would suggest depression, but deliberately controlled, the specific practice management of someone trained to reveal a minimum of internal state. His presenting symptoms were consistent with what Elena recognized from a different professional context entirely as operational stress syndrome, the accumulated psychological weight of long-term high-stakes work in environments of constant threat assessment and consequential decision-making. She completed his intake without flagging any anomalies. She asked no questions that weren't medically necessary. She ensured his room was private and quiet and left him to settle. 90 minutes later, everything changed. Preston Holloway had developed over 5 days on Ward 7 the particular territorial comfort of a man making grudging peace with a space. Part of that had manifested as a self-directed routine of walking the corridor after meals, the physical habit of a man who needed his body occupied so his mind had somewhere to put its energy that wasn't the past. Elena was near the medication room when she heard his voice carry down the hall. Not his controlled authority, but something raw. The voice of a man whose pattern recognition had just produced a result he wasn't prepared for. "I know you," Holloway said. She moved without appearing to hurry. She came around the corner to find him standing in the open doorway of room 714. One hand braced on the doorframe. His posture carried the particular hybrid of confrontation and confusion that belongs to someone who has encountered something their brain is working hard to categorize. Inside the room, V. Hargrove had gone completely still. Not the stillness of fear, but the coiled, assessing stillness of someone who has instantly recalculated the dimensions of a situation and is determining the optimal response. "Colonel Holloway." She reached his side. "This room is. His name isn't Hargrove." He didn't look at her. "I know this man. He was attached to my unit in Fallujah in 2005. Civilian intelligence advisor. Ryan HBT briefings for 3 weeks. He went by a different name." He turned to Elena, and his eyes were sharp with the disorientation of a man who has encountered a ghost in a linoleum corridor. "Why is he using a different name?" V. Hargrove said nothing. He looked at Elena. His expression was opaque and entirely deliberate. "Colonel." She placed one hand lightly on Holloway's arm, not restraining, just redirecting, and used the full weight of the corridor voice. "I need you in the hallway right now." His body responded to the voice before his mind could redirect it. He stepped back. She pulled the door of 714 closed with a soft, firm click. In the hallway, Holloway turned on her, voice low and eyes burning. "That man is running a cover identity in a civilian hospital. I have 30 years of operational context, and I'm telling you that whatever his presence here represents, it is not a standard psychiatric admission." "I hear you," Elena said. "The appropriate response is to speak with me or Dr. Reyes, not to enter an unauthorized room. Can we do that?" He stared at her. Something is very wrong here. Room 708, Elena said gently. Please. He went, but the look he carried over his shoulder was not the look of a man letting it go. The call from administration came at 2:15 in the afternoon. The fourth floor of Millhaven General was administration country. Pale carpet, framed abstract prints, the filtered institutional quiet of a floor that had never contained a medical emergency. In Rothwell's corner office, 4 people were arranged in the upholstered chairs. The administrator himself looking acutely uncomfortable, a heavy-set man in his mid-60s in an expensive dark suit, carrying the specific stillness of someone who had spent decades developing the talent of looking like he was saying nothing even when he was saying something. A woman in her late 40s with a severe bun and a thin gold watch carrying a professional displeasure so refined it had become a physical characteristic, and Colonel Holloway, arms crossed, posture carrying the combination of conviction and discomfort that belonged to someone who had initiated something and was watching it play out. Elena sat down without being invited. There are security concerns regarding a specific patient, the heavy-set man said. His voice had the unhurried cadence of someone accustomed to rooms where his pace set the rhythm. The individual in room 714 may be carrying information of significant national sensitivity. We have an interest in assessing the situation directly. You want access to my patient, Elena said. We want to ensure appropriate protocols are being observed. Who do you work for? A brief pause. That's not relevant to this conversation. It's directly relevant to whether I allow you near any patient in my care, Elena said pleasantly. The woman leaned forward. Her voice carried the fine edge of someone practiced at cutting through institutional resistance. Ms. Vasquez, your cooperation, or your failure to cooperate, will be noted at levels above this hospital's administrative structure. Elena looked at Rothwell. Gary. Are you ordering me to provide these individuals with access to a patient? Rothwell looked between Elena and the heavy-set man. He looked profoundly unhappy. I'm asking you to work with our guests toward a resolution, he managed. That's not an order, Elena said. Put the directive in writing with the legal basis and the institutional affiliation of the requesting parties. That protects the hospital. She stood. I'll be in the supply room. 5 minutes. She walked to the door. Ms. Vasquez, the woman's voice harder now. You are a night shift psychiatric nurse. You dispense medication and document behavioral observations. You are not equipped to make security determinations. We are. Elena stopped. She turned and looked at the woman for one full, unhurried second. The kind of look that had once, in a conference room in Amman, caused a deputy director of the Jordanian General Intelligence Directorate to change the subject entirely. Have a good afternoon, she said, and left. The supply room was narrow and fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial laundry and antiseptic. Elena stood in the center of it and thought with the particular clarity she had always been able to access under pressure, not faster, exactly, but cleaner. The noise fell away. The relevant variables arranged themselves. The people in Rothwell's office were not federal agents. If they had been, the legal framework would have been explicit, and Rothwell's sphere would have had a different, more specific quality. They were private sector, the gray zone world that drew on former agency and military personnel and operated in the spaces that official institutions couldn't occupy. She had worked alongside people from that world. She had been suspicious of some of them. V. Hargrove had a 202 area code on his emergency contact. One number. No name. The kind of contact that was intended to reach someone specific and to be unintelligible to anyone who didn't know what it meant. She pulled her personal phone from her scrub pocket and dialed the number from memory. She memorized numbers the way other people breathed, without deciding to. It rang twice. A voice answered, male. Controlled. The vocal quality of someone answering a monitored line and offering nothing beyond acknowledgement. Yes. My name is Elena Vasquez, she said, her voice low and level. I'm a registered nurse at a hospital in the Midwest. I have a patient admitted under the name V. Hargrove. There are individuals currently in this building attempting to gain unauthorized access to him. I'm calling this number because it's the only emergency contact on his intake form, and I believe the situation warrants it. A pause. 3 seconds. Spell your last name. She did. Hold. She held. 40 seconds of background, the acoustic quality of a large, busy office where people were doing things that mattered. A different voice came on the line. Older, stripped of everything performative, carrying only weight. Ms. Vasquez, you called the emergency contact line for an asset at Millhaven General. Yes. Describe the individuals. She described them efficiently. The heavy-set man, the woman, the specific quality of their operational presence, the vocabulary they had used. Noted. National sensitivity, security concern. The words that told her what they were, without telling her who they were. A longer pause. How long can you hold your current position? Approximately 4 minutes before the written administrative order reaches the ward. 4 minutes is more than sufficient. Do not leave the building. The line went dead. Elena picked up a stack of folded pillowcases and walked back into the corridor. At 4:51 in the afternoon, the telephone at the Ward 7 nurses' station rang. Daria answered it. Her face went through 3 distinct phases in 6 seconds. Professional, confused, then a very clean and specific shock, before she held the receiver toward Elena with a hand that was visibly shaking. "It's for you," Daria managed. She dropped her voice to a whisper that was still audible across the entire station. "He says his name is the director of the CIA," the woman with the severe bun, who had positioned herself near the nurses' station while waiting for Rothwell's written order, went absolutely still. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of someone recalibrating everything they had assumed about the situation they were in. Elena crossed the station and took the phone. "Vasquez," she said. The older voice, clear, unhurried, carrying the weight of someone for whom this was not the most consequential call of the day, but was being given its full attention regardless. "Ms. Vasquez, my understanding is that you've been asked to vacate room 714 and provide certain individuals with access to one of my offices." "That's accurate." "And you declined. I asked for a written directive specifying the legal basis for the request and the institutional affiliation of the requesting parties." A pause. "I'd like to speak with your hospital administrator." "He's on this floor," Elena said. "One moment." She looked across the station at Rothwell, who was standing near the corridor entry reading the draft of his own written order with the expression of a man already having second thoughts about several things simultaneously. "Gary," she said, "the phone is for you." He crossed the station. He took the receiver. He said his name into it, and then said nothing for 43 seconds. His face moved through a precise sequence. Confusion, the dawning comprehension of exactly who he was speaking to, and finally the particular, ghastly expression of a man who realizes he has been comprehensively wrong about which side of a situation he wanted to be on. "Yes, sir," Rothwell said. "I understand completely. Of course. Absolutely, sir." He held the phone out to Elena. His hand was steady, but his color had changed. "He'd like to speak with you again." She took it. "Ms. Vasquez." "Sir, the individuals in your building represent a private intelligence firm with a commercial interest in information that my officer possesses. They have no government authorization for what they are attempting. They have been misrepresenting their authority. Your administrator has been informed." "Understood. My officer is to remain under your care until I arrange transport. Within 6 hours. He's stable," Elena said. "His sleep has actually improved on the current medication protocol. The prazosin seems to be helping." A pause. Brief. "Ms. Vasquez, how long have you been a psychiatric nurse?" 29 months. "And before that?" It was not a question. It was a statement that acknowledged it already knew the answer and was giving her the choice of how to respond. She looked at Daria, who was studying the computer screen with extraordinary concentration. She looked at Rothwell, who was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on an administrator's face, something attempting to reconcile several incompatible versions of the same person. She looked at the woman with the severe bun, who had moved away from the station and was speaking quietly into her own phone with the posture of someone receiving very bad news and maintaining professional composure about it by sheer force of will. Colonel Holloway was standing near the entrance to the corridor. She hadn't heard him come out of his room. He was looking at her, and the expression on his face was sorting through several things simultaneously. The 47 minutes in the hallway, the medication conversations, the specific quality of authority in her voice that he had never quite been able to categorize, and arriving slowly and visibly at an accounting that made a completely different kind of sense. Before this, Elena said carefully, "I worked for the government." "Yes," the director said. "You worked for me. And your file, Ms. Vasquez, has never been fully closed. There is a specific reason for that. I would very much like to discuss it with you in person." "I'm currently mid-shift," Elena said. "I have 11 patients." The pause that followed was longer than the others. It had a quality she couldn't fully read, a slight, almost imperceptible shift in register that she associated with an unexpected answer arriving in a place where expected answers were the norm. "Of course," the director said. "We'll discuss it at your convenience. In the meantime, the call you made to that number, the speed with which you assessed the situation, the decision to route it the way you did rather than escalating through hospital channels, every judgment call was exactly right." "My patient's safety was at risk," Elena said. "It was the only relevant consideration." "Yes," the director said. "That is exactly the answer I was looking for." The line clicked off. Elena set the phone down in its cradle with the same careful, deliberate motion she used for everything that mattered. She stood in the particular silence that follows something that has irrevocably changed shape. Rothwell was holding his written order and looking at it the way a man looks at something he wishes he had never put on paper. He walked to the small shredder near the nurse's station. He fed the paper through. The mechanical grinding sound it made was thin, functional, and in context, entirely appropriate. Holloway walked down the corridor toward her. He stopped a careful distance away. The aggressive territorial energy was gone. What remained was a man sitting with the discomfort of having been comprehensively wrong about something, which was, in Elena's experience, actually a more useful state than being right. "The 47 minutes in the hallway," he said slowly. "Everything in those 47 minutes. You weren't running a clinical technique." "I was listening," Elena said. "You've been where I've been," he said. Not a question. She looked at him steadily. She neither confirmed nor denied, but something in the quality of the steadiness, the specific, undefended kind that only comes from having actually been somewhere and coming back from it, told him everything he needed to know. He exhaled, long and ragged, the exhale of a man releasing something that had been held under significant pressure. "For the record," he said quietly, "I formally withdraw the characterization I used in Rothwell's office, the one about the night shift nurse with the medication cart." "The description was accurate," Elena said. "The description was insufficient," he said. "Room 708, Colonel. You have group at 5. He went. At 10:47 that night, 6 hours and 11 minutes after the phone call, 2 people in civilian clothes arrived on Ward 7 and spoke with V. Hargrove for 8 minutes. He walked out under his own power, carrying the small bag he had been admitted with." He paused at the nurse's station. He looked at Elena with the direct, spare quality of someone who had decided to say exactly what he meant, and nothing beyond it. "Good care," he said. "Safe travels," she said. He left. Ward 7 settled back into its 2 a.m. rhythm. The medication cart. The left front wheels squeak. Room 701. Room 703. Room 708. In room 708, Colonel Preston Holloway was asleep before midnight for the first time since his admission. His breathing slow and even. On his bedside table, the medication cup was empty. The prazosin, gone. Elena documented it in the chart. She sat for a moment afterward at the nurse's station, in the low-frequency quiet of the ward at this hour. The bleach, the antiseptic, the warm human layer beneath. She had been sitting with these same three smells for 29 months, and she had learned to find something close to peace in them, in their reliability, in the way they grounded her in a present that was concrete and uncomplicated and asked nothing from her past. Her phone was in her scrub pocket. In it was a number. The director's callback line, which had registered on the nurse's station display and which she had written on a small square of station notepad paper. She had not thrown it away. She thought about the voice on the phone. Your file has never been fully closed. There is a specific reason for that. She thought about the 47 minutes with Holloway. She thought about Miss A. Trujillo in room 703, who would not remember Elena's name in 10 years and would not know anything about private intelligence firms or phone calls or CIA directors, and who would only know that someone had sat with her in a plastic chair at 2 a.m. and said, "You're not alone in here." That had been enough. It had always been enough. The medication cart's left front wheel squeaked. Elena Vasquez, night shift psychiatric nurse, formerly NOC officer, clandestine service, Central Intelligence Agency, pushed it forward and went back to work. The square of paper was still in her pocket. She hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't decided yet what that meant, but she had learned, a long time ago in rooms she was not allowed to name, that the decisions that mattered were rarely made at the moment of maximum pressure. They were made in the quiet, when the crisis was over and the paperwork was done and the ward was breathing in its particular, layered way and you were alone with whatever you actually were. Squeak. Pause. Squeak. Pause. Room 701. Room 703. Room 706. Room 708. 11 patients. All of them still breathing. All of them, for now, safe. It was enough. It was always enough. If this story of quiet strength, hidden loyalty in the moment when the most dangerous person in the room is finally, completely seen, kept you leaning forward, hit that like button and share it with someone who understands that the most powerful people in the room are often the ones nobody's watching. Subscribe for more stories of hidden heroes who carry their past in silence and act with precision exactly when it matters. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Elena's place?